Hey guys, what's happening? Welcome back to the channel. It's me, Rocco, again. And today we're going to be doing an album review. It's going to be kind of embarrassing, but nonetheless, I'm excited. And the reason I say I'm embarrassed to do this album review is because I've only been listening to this album for 2 weeks. And I know what you're thinking. You're seeing the title of this album review. It's such a renowned album, such a fucking classic. How have I only been listening to this album for 2 weeks? Well, I have no excuse. I'm extremely fucking embarrassed. I mean, this album here, it's a bona fide masterpiece. And oh shit, my stove's beeping. I'll put in the food after. But this album here is a fucking bona fide masterpiece of metal. One of the most influential albums of all time. And according to many people, Judas Priest's finest album. And it is the first Judas Priest album I've ever heard in my life. Now, I got to explain this because, how could someone like me, I'm a huge metal fan, I'm a huge hard rock fan, huge progressive rock fan, basically the three main elements of this album. I'm a huge fan of. They're my favorite genres of music. How have I not discovered this album? Well, let's just take a step back here. I've known about Judas Priest for a long ass time, at least 10 years, I'd say, since I was about 13, 14 years old. And, I have heard many of their songs. Well, not many, a few of their songs, like a lot of their hits. Like Breaking the Law, Living After Midnight, Electric Eye, You Got Another Thing Coming. You're probably cringing right now because those are probably the most overplayed songs. But I gotta be honest, that was my Judas Priest exposure. And those songs, although they were really good, they just didn't interest me personally. Like, I'm a big progressive rock fan, a big metal fan. And those songs, they just sounded like, just your average hard rock, kind of like, your average hard rock song. Well, not really Electric Eye. That one's actually amazing. But those other three songs, like, they're good. They're really good. But it didn't really spark my interest to kind of delve deep into the Judas Priest canon. And, the years went by, and I would always get intrigued by other bands, and I would get into those other bands, and, like, I'm a really slow listener. That's the problem. I mean, when I listen to an album, I got to hear it, like, 10, 15 times. Like, I can't just hear it one time. I got to really absorb an album. And as you could probably tell, that's a lengthy process. I mean, if you have all these fucking bands, oftentimes with 15 to 20 albums in their discography, it's going to take a long time for me to get into it. And that's just me. That's just how I roll. But I really think that's how you really enjoy something, really absorb an album, really enjoy it. Don't just listen to it just to see what it is and then set it aside. But yeah, exactly. So with Judas Priest, that's how it was. I just kept putting them on the back burner. I would keep getting reminded of them. I would see comments about them saying how influential they were and one of the greatest metal bands. And I definitely should have listened to a full album because I was basing it on those hits. But usually hits are a good indication of what a band's all about. Like look at Sabbath. Snowblind, Paranoid, Iron Man. Those are all fantastic songs. Maybe not like the greatest Sabbath songs, but pretty representative of their sound. But with Priest, that's totally different. And basically what got me reinterested in them was I've been doing these Black Sabbath reviews, if you've been following them. And, a lot of research goes into that. And I was researching kind of like how they influence the genre. And I saw many, many comments, many articles just going on about how Judas Priest were, like next to Sabbath, the most influential metal band. And I was reading this thinking, that's kind of, from the songs I've heard, they just sound pretty standard, pretty, derivative of hard rock. And, I would keep seeing this over and over. So I'm like, okay, Rocco, there's something going on here. You got to investigate this. And that's when I started doing the research. So what did I do? I went on the good old YouTube and typed in Judas Priest. Now, I emphasize live because a true test of a band's worth is seeing their live performances. And I was scrolling through, and one video caught my eye. It was a video of Judas Priest, 1975, performing on the BBC's Grey Whistle Test. And the song in question was called Dreamer Deceiver / Deceiver. So that title alone intrigued me. I'm like, the repetition of the word deceiver. I'm like, what's this all about? And I saw the thumbnail and I saw the singer, and I'm like, wait, that's not Rob Halford, because, I'm not stupid. I know what Rob Halford looks like, with the goatee and the fucking bald head and, and then obviously in the 80s with the blonde hair and like the leather and studs. And this guy looked nothing like him. So I'm like, okay, maybe this is like before Rob Halford joined because, Judas Priest were infamous for their lineup changes in the early 70s. I clicked on the video and it turned out to be Halford, and I was fucking blown away. I mean, this song I watched the video maybe like 5 times. I was obsessed. It was fucking fantastic. The music was progressive. Rob Halford's vocal range was just incredible. And the band looked totally different than I was used to. Like, I was used to seeing them with like leather and like studs and, that whole, hard rock, hard ass kind of image, with the motorcycles and all that. And this band here, they were just wearing very eccentric shit. But like at the time in the 70s, it was nothing really, out of the question. And the music obviously was phenomenal. So I'm like, okay, you know what? I got to start with this album. So I researched it. The album was Sad Wings of Destiny, that contained Dreamer, Deceiver / Deceiver. And last week I went for a walk, which is normally what I do when I get into an album. Like, I don't really like sitting and listening to it. I like kind of walking and listening to it. And it was fucking amazing. The first time I heard it, it was good. The second time I heard it, it was fucking phenomenal. And the third time I heard it, I was obsessed. I mean, it was just mind-blowing. And I totally understood what people were saying, like how they were so influential, because I was keeping in mind that the album was released in 1976 when I was listening to it. And I heard so much influence. I heard so much Maiden. I heard so much, I was going to say Metallica, but not really. But, elements that would later become Metallica. And just so much of that classic heavy metal sound that we kind of take for granted. That, I always assumed Sabbath created metal, and then Deep Purple and Zeppelin created elements of metal that bands would like synthesize into their sound. But now I gotta add Judas Priest to that list, because there are moments on this album that are just strictly Judas Priest. I mean, just such a unique sound. I mean, you got the twin guitar sound that pretty much launched Iron Maiden's career. You got like the high-pitched operatic vocals, which, obviously a lot of singers were doing, like Freddie Mercury, Ian Gillan from Deep Purple. But Rob Halford really takes that into like a hard rock, heavy metal direction. Well, I guess Freddie Mercury did that too, but yeah, he was influenced by Freddie Mercury. And obviously Dio would do that as well, but obviously not as high-pitched, not as shrieking. And just such an influence. I mean, the aggression on it, the progressive rock influence. I mean, not only did they distill their influences onto this album, but they created influences and basically created heavy metal as we know it today. Taking elements from Sabbath, Deep Purple, Queen, all that shit, and just making it their own. And I was blown away. And ever since, I've been obsessed with the album, needless to say. And now I'm trying to do it justice by doing a review, because, just take this review with a grain of salt. I'm only 2 weeks in, but I had to get this off my chest. So with time, usually albums grow on me, and sometimes they kind of like grow off of me, but I highly doubt this is going to grow off of me. I mean, it's fucking phenomenal. So yeah, without further ado, let's get into the history behind this. It was so much fun doing the research. Such an interesting story behind Judas Priest. And I'm happy to share that with you guys if you're interested. So if you want to skip to like the track-by-track reviews, just check the table of contents below. But if you want to stick around for some of the historical background, then be my guest. Alright guys, so when I was doing the history research for this album, I was just extremely intrigued, because the history of Judas Priest is actually so interesting, so enthralling. And what really surprised me, well, there were a few things, but the first thing that surprised me were this band formed in 1969, okay? I always thought of Judas Priest as like a late 70s band, early 80s kind of band. But no, they've been fucking around since 1969. So they were actually contemporaries with Zeppelin, contemporaries with Sabbath and Deep Purple. I always assumed like they came later. They were like heavily influenced by them. But no, they were around since 69. And another interesting thing is that at the time of their first debut, like their debut album, no original members were in the band from like when the band first formed in 69. KK Downing and Glenn Tipton were around for a while, but no original members existed. So that just really goes to show this band really struggled a lot. And it's insane because even when they did find their footing in like the mid 70s, especially with this album, they wouldn't really achieve any commercial success until 1980 with the album British Steel, which is basically the album I'm talking about when I'm saying like, these were the songs I was exposed to from Judas Priest that, didn't really thrill me. So I'm definitely going to have to give that album a listen, but, the hits didn't really do it for me that much. But yeah, just putting that aside, the band really struggled. I mean, 11 years of toiling in the fields of metal. Fuck me, that's insane. And I mean, with an album as good as Sad Wings of Destiny, the timing of it was kind of shit because this was the time of punk rock, and punk rock was all the rage. Always counteracting against my favorite genres. I mean, progressive rock. People say punk rock kind of killed that shit, and I kind of agree. And even with heavy metal and hard rock, a lot of people found it like overblown, and which is complete fucking bullshit. I mean, okay, music is, not to get off on a tangent, but music is like an artistic form of expression. How could that be overblown? I mean, you're expressing your, artistic integrity. So, to complain that music is overblown, just to me is just kind of ridiculous. The only time music is overblown for me is when, you're soloing for like 20 minutes. That's kind of overblown. But anyway, putting that rant aside, this album came out at a kind of a shitty time because punk rock was all the rage. And, this album does have a lot of progressive elements on it, which I really love and I'm really excited to talk about. But yeah, so really Judas Priest were a struggling band. I mean, they struggled for 10 years. And, thankfully, like Sabbath found their footing pretty early on and they were pretty popular. But Judas Priest's debut album wouldn't come out until 1974, which was when Sabbath just finished releasing Sabotage, their sixth, masterpiece album in a row. So I guess that's why I consider Judas Priest kind of like a later years band. But no, they were around and, maybe they were even influencing other people. Who knows? But anyway, the point was, they really struggled, and even with this album being as good as it was, they still struggled. So just keep that in mind. So basically, at this point, Judas Priest had an album under their belt called the Rockarola, just a horrible name, kind of like a play on Coca-Cola. And yeah, not a lot of fans like this album. I mean, I haven't heard it personally, but even the band kind of dismissed it as like a shitty first album because they went into the studio and. Funnily enough, they were produced by Roger Bain, who produced the first 3 Sabbath albums. So, great producer in my books. And he was kind of an asshole. I mean, he was dictating like what the band should put on the album. He was cutting down the length of a lot of the songs. And, a lot of the great songs that would appear on Sad Wings of Destiny were actually written before the first album. I should mention, this is their second album. But like songs like Tyrant and Genocide and things like that were written before Sad Wings of Destiny. But yeah, they basically had to wait to their second album to release these fantastic songs because of this asshole producer. So yeah, the band really, they really took that to heart, and to this day they kind of trashed the album. I gotta give it a listen because hopefully it's an underrated gem, but probably not based on what the band said about it. Rob Halford even joked to the audience, like, burn your copies of Rockarola once Sad Wings of Destiny came out. And who knows if they actually did, but, they kind of dismissed the album. And, you could tell because when you listen to songs like Tyrant and Genocide and things like that, you could tell this is like a hungry band. They're aggressive, they're hungry for success, and they want to just really make an impact on the music scene. But, they were, I guess at the time, like, there were pressures from the record industry and their producer. And from as far as I know, Rockarola has a lot of, just regular rock elements, doesn't really have their definitive sound. So maybe that was another reason why it took a long time for the band to pick up steam. But probably not, because then again, they've been around since 1969 and Rockarola came out in 1974. So, they were still struggling. And, the band really did go through a lot of lineup changes. I mentioned that no original members survived from the initial lineup, which I can't remember who the initial members were, but I know their lead singer was Al Atkins, who actually has a few writing credits on this album. So I guess a few of the songs, especially on Victim of Changes and I believe Dreamer Deceiver, were kind of co-written by Al Atkins, but at this point he was out of the band, and of course we had Rob Halford, who was on the debut album. So just to avoid any confusion, the members of the band at this point were Rob Halford on vocals, KK Downing and Glenn Tipton on twin guitars, and Ian Hill on bass, and on drums we had Alan Moore. Sorry, I got to check my reference because I'm not too familiar with the band, but interestingly enough, Alan Moore, the drummer, he would only be on this one album, and that was kind of a common theme with Judas Priest at the time, with the drummers being different on every single album. I don't know what the fuck was going on in the drum department, but they kept revolving drummers over and over again. And it's kind of funny because the movie Spinal Tap would kind of reference this and make fun of it. And you're a successful band when Spinal Tap makes fun of you. Like, that's how you know you made it. They made fun of Sabbath. They made fun of Yes. Just really funny shit. And so yeah, the band went through a lot of lineup changes, with the drumming especially. But the drums are pretty good on this album, so I don't know. Good enough for me. But yeah, other than the drummers, the rest of the band remained pretty consistent throughout this era and well into the 2000s. I mean, as far as I know, Glenn Tipton, KK Downing, Rob Halford, and Ian Hill were basically, in the band right up till the present day. As far as I understand, KK Downing is no longer in the band. So correct me if I'm wrong, but apparently he's no longer in the band. He retired or something like that. And unfortunately, I just read recently that Glenn Tipton has Parkinson's disease, which is just an incredibly debilitating disease, as we all know. And he's not going to be touring with the band anymore. So, that's really sad. And I guess that's just the reality we all have to face as like classic rock fans, classic metal fans, that all these amazing bands from the past are going to start fading away. They're getting into their 70s and even early 80s, some of these bands. And it's just a fact of life, you can't just keep going on forever. And it's really sad and depressing, but that's just something we all have to go through in life. And just listen to the classic era, keep the music alive, and that's really all we can do at this point. So anyway, enough about the present. Let's go back to the past. So I already mentioned the band was struggling. They produced Rock-a-Rolla, heavily burdened by Roger Bain's influence on shortening the songs and all that shit. So the band went on tour, and as I mentioned earlier, they appeared on this BBC show called The Grey Whistle Test. And man, when I saw the performance on the Grey Whistle Test, my mind was blown. I mean, it was just freaking incredible. Again, that performance of Dreamer, Deceiver just pretty much just changed my whole outlook on the band. And it's just crazy because, Judas Priest, they were known for kind of creating the image of heavy metal, with all the leather and the studs and the motorcycles. They really gave metal its look. So, they were kind of like fashion icons, to be honest. But back then, they just looked like, straight out of the 70s, like bell-bottom jeans, their chests exposed, long, feminine dresses, things or not dresses, but, feminine gowns and, long hair down to their asses. And it's just hilarious because they're playing this music as heavy as ever, dressed like, pure hippies. And, you could really tell at this point Judas Priest haven't really, come to fully realize their identity. But musically, they have 100%. I mean, that performance was incredible. And, with a performance like that, Judas Priest were just dying to get back in the studio and finally record an album that was representative of their true sound. Because these guys were really hungry at this point. I mean, they had been struggling for so many years, and they wanted to get out there and make their true statement on the music industry. And when I say these guys were hungry for success, I literally mean these guys were fucking hungry. I mean, if you look at the Grey Whistle Test, holy shit, these guys look pretty, pretty skinny, pretty not malnourished, but you know what I mean. Apparently they were living off one meal a day. They were extremely poor. A lot of the members had to take up day jobs. For example, KK Downing had to work in the factories of Birmingham. And they were really struggling. And it looked like this whole music career wasn't going to be working out for them. And I could really relate, myself, I'm not a musician. but I do have a lot of friends that are like trying to get into the music business, and it's really hard these days. I mean, like, it's all like digital downloading, and this is the age of like instant gratification where people just like listen to a song and just, they enjoy it for like a day or two and then they just put it aside. And especially these days, it's really hard for like hard rock and heavy metal bands to really, gain prominence in today's day and age. And it hits close to home because here we have Judas Priest. Even back then, when hard rock and heavy metal was, at an all-time high, it still took them a good, like, if you think about it, a good 11 years to really, really gain some critical success. And, I always encourage my friends, like, keep going, like, never give up because, although it might be depressing and although, like, in all reality, it might never happen, you still got to give it a shot because look at bands like Judas Priest. I mean, nowadays they're regarded as one of the greatest metal bands of all time, one of the most influential. But back then, it was just a pure struggle for these guys. And, I mentioned that KK Downing was, he had to work in like the factories of Birmingham. And that's another interesting thing about the band. They're from Birmingham. And as most of us know, Black Sabbath also originated from Birmingham. And to this day, a lot of the band members say that growing up in like the Midlands of England, around that Birmingham area, really played like an important part on inspiring like all these heavy metal acts of the time, especially Sabbath and obviously Judas Priest, because it was just such a bleak scene. I mean, post-war, Birmingham was just basically the industrial center, the industrial epicenter of England, and it was just all factories and pollution, and it was just a really heavy scene. And the band would even say they would literally hear like the churning sounds and like the heavy thumping coming out of the factories. And yeah, it really created this kind of like inherent heavy metal rhythm within them. And that's really cool because if you think about it, that the atmosphere at the time, the heavy industry, working in the factories really gave birth to the heavy metal genre. So it's like saying metal gave birth to metal. And especially with the story I was mentioning on my Black Sabbath reviews with Tony Iommi getting his fingers cut off in the sheet metal factory. I mean, it's just perfect. I mean, it worked out just so perfectly. And, Judas Priest were definitely one of the first bands, along with Sabbath, to really come out from that, that industrial landscape and really, like, lay down the foundations for this incredible genre of music. And so the band went into the studio, finally, and, they just churned out classic after classic. They didn't hold back. I mean, they just threw caution to the wind and just did what they wanted to do. And out came Sad Wings of Destiny. And, I don't know how into drugs and other substances Judas Priest were into, but according to the Wikipedia page, they remained sober throughout the entire sessions. So that's really good. If they were into drugs, I don't even know, but it's good that they stayed sober and, really put their best foot forward into the recording sessions. And I should also mention that the album cover of this album, it's just freaking incredible. I mean, I love the album cover. It depicts this kind of like fallen angel wearing like the necklace with a Judas Priest 3-pronged cross, which would later become their emblem. And it's just one of my favorite album covers. I mean, right off the bat, I looked at this album cover and I was like, holy shit, this is just a work of art in and of itself. And the album came out and Judas Priest went on tour, and the rest is history. I mean, like, they went on to become one of the most successful metal bands of all time. So many platinum albums, so many best-selling singles. And interestingly enough, although this album was amazing, it did take them a couple more albums to really gain footing and, really get wide critical and commercial acclaim with their album British Steel. But today, it's all about Sad Wings of Destiny. And this album just really stood the test of time. And, it's really gone down in history as being one of the most influential metal albums ever. And, although Judas Priest didn't really get commercial success with this album, these days it's held in a really high regard. It's aged incredibly well. And I'm pretty sure most Judas Priest fans consider this like the best album, if not like in the top like 3 or 4 Judas Priest albums. And, I could definitely see why. So that's basically the history behind the album. Rob Halford considers it his favorite Judas Priest album, so that just gives it a little bit more legitimacy. But Yeah, so let's just dive into the influence that this album had on the industry, and I guess my overall review of the album. Well, needless to say, this album was kind of like the second coming of Jesus Christ. If Jesus Christ was fucking Satan, that is, in terms of it being like really the second coming of heavy metal. Since Black Sabbath's inception, we had a few other bands that were kind of like bearing the torch, especially Deep Purple, Rainbow, which Rainbow Rising actually came out the same year as this. So that can really also be considered kind of like the second coming of heavy metal after Sabbath. And of course, you had like your hard rock bands like, AC/DC and things like that just emerging at this time. And Van Halen would come out soon. But none of them were really heavy metal, like in the sense of like Black Sabbath being a definitive metal band. But Judas Priest definitely ushered that in. And as I mentioned earlier on in the video, they really, created elements of the heavy metal sound that Sabbath hadn't really touched in their career so far, and that today heavy metal as a genre is kind of like a combination of like, at its root, that is, it's basically a combination of what Judas Priest did in the 70s and what Sabbath did in the 70s. Like those two bands really laid out like that foundational sound. And basically what Judas Priest did on this album is they basically ushered in the new wave of British heavy metal, which wouldn't really, take prominence until like maybe 2-3 years down the line, or even 4 years, which just goes to show how far ahead of the game these guys were. I mean, these guys were extremely fucking ahead of their times, like extremely. And it's just incredible to listen to this and think it came out in the mid 70s, because it really sounds like so fresh and so, like not like necessarily 80s metal, but you could hear so many of those elements. And what they brought with this album, number one, the twin guitar sound. I mean, no other bands were really doing that at the time. And there you go. There's Iron Maiden right there. The main sound of Iron Maiden, other than Steve Harris's galloping bass playing, was the twin guitar sound. And we gotta say that originates with Judas Priest. Like they were the founders of that. With Glenn Tipton and KK Downing, and their dual guitar assault. Just that incredible sound was just solidified with Judas Priest on this album. Secondly, we got the operatic vocals. Okay. Now, a lot of singers in the 70s were doing this, most notably Ian Gillan. Well, Ian Gillan was more of a shrieking kind of vocal, like a banshee wail. And obviously, most notably, Freddie Mercury, who was Rob Halford's greatest hero. And that really comes across on the album because there was a lot of operatic vocals. And, the uniqueness of Rob Halford's operatic vocals is that he incorporates that onto a metal sound. Whereas before, when you would get these, like, loud, larger than life vocals, it would always be kind of combined with, just regular rock or, progressive rock. But then again, Freddie Mercury did sing a lot of heavier Queen tracks. So I really think Rob Halford just took a lot of inspiration from Freddie Mercury. And I just want to give that I just want to highlight that because, maybe a lot of metal fans aren't too familiar with Queen and their impact that they had on Judas Priest. But it's definitely there. I mean, Night at the Opera had come out the year before, and that was a hugely successful, hugely influential album. So Rob Halford would have had to have been listening to that at the time and really incorporating that into his sound. But nonetheless, he did pioneer that kind of like, operatic, higher register singing in terms of heavy metal. Because up to that point, we had Ozzy Osbourne, who was obviously not, he did sing very high pitched, but in a different way, like much less operatic. And, and he did have a lot more like guttural nature to his vocals compared to Rob Halford. But, Rob Halford just took that to the next level. And of course, you had Ronnie James Dio also at the time with the operatic vocals. But I'd say Rob Halford. Sorry, I meant Ronnie. Yeah. Can't remember what I said now. But I think Rob Halford definitely was the leading figure in that kind of vocal style, which was a huge influence. Again, especially on Iron Maiden. Okay, what are we on? Number 2 or number 3? I think number 3. The third thing that they pioneered on this album. Definitely, like, a lot of the aggression on this album would, give way into the thrash metal scene in the, like, mid to early 80s. There are a lot of songs on this album that are just extremely heavy for the 1970s. Not compared to, like, Metallica and stuff that would come later on. But at the time, there was a lot of aggression on this album. I mean, there was this scream, like, near the end of Victim of Changes, that it just sounds like it's coming from the depths of hell. It sounds so evil, and it's just so guttural and incredible. I mean, the aggression is fantastic on this album, and I think a lot of metal bands took a look at that and started saying, hey, these guys are really, taking like the extremity of this music to the next level, and really getting a lot of influence from that as well. And again, Rob Halford, I'm mentioning now that he's doing these guttural vocals, but his vocal range is just outstanding. I mean, one of the greatest singers I ever heard in my life, hands down, because some of the songs, he's singing just from the depths of his bowels. Like his voice is extremely deep, and it actually comes across kind of humorous because you have Rob Halford. He's known for hitting these like extremely high screams, these extremely high wails, but then again, he has this low vocal range as well, which he really utilizes on this album to kind of a funny extent on some songs, because we'll talk about it more in detail later, but there's a ballad on this album that's just hilarious. I love it, but it's funny because his vocals are just so deep to the point of it being kind of like a crooner, like a 50s like Frank Sinatra kind of like, from that generation, which is just freaking hilarious. And it's just a testament to Rob Halford's vocal range. So overall, this album is just extremely influential, extremely pioneering. I mean, Dave Mustaine said it best, when he was a kid, he was listening to this album in the mid 70s, and his brother would literally like beat the shit out of him for listening to this kind of music. And from that day forth, he swore to get revenge by, eventually forming and joining a metal band. And we all know how, like, what went down there with his, initial work in Metallica, and then forming Megadeth, one of my favorite heavy metal bands of all time, hands down, one of the best thrash bands ever. And, that alone just shows the influence this album had. Because most people think of it as, having more of an influence on the British heavy metal scene, but it definitely impacted all aspects of heavy metal. Not to mention progressive metal as well. Because this is the main reason I love this album. There are so many progressive rock elements on this album, like long extended solos and like intricate time signature changes. And, the songs go in some really interesting directions that, you would never predict. And I find that so interesting. And, a lot of like the progressive metal bands that would come out, like kind of like Iron Maiden later on, I really think they listen to this and it really inspired them to incorporate a lot of like strange kind of like time changes and, sections within their metal songs. Then again, with Maiden, Steve Harris was a huge progressive rock fan to begin with, so that may or may not be true. But I definitely think a lot of the other heavy metal bands at the time, that would initially, write some more of the progressive material, were heavily influenced by this album as well. So there you have it, guys. I mean, it had influence on every single aspect of metal. We got the twin guitars, we got the operatic vocals, we got the aggression, going on to influence thrash metal. We got the progressive metal influence right here. I mean, this album literally has it all. It's groundbreaking. And I'm just getting so excited talking about it because I've been missing out all these years. And we're going to correct that shit today. So without further ado, let's get into the details. Let's get into the specifics and talk about the track-by-track reviews, which is really my favorite part of the reviews, where we really get into like what makes the song stand out for me. So stay tuned for that, guys. Alright guys, here we are at the start of the track-by-track reviews, and I have a daunting task ahead of me because the first track on the album is fucking Victim of Changes. And I mean, I feel like no matter what I say about this song, it's not going to do it justice. It's just that great. It's a fucking metal classic. It's a fan favorite. The band play it live like all the time apparently, and it's considered one of the most influential and iconic heavy metal songs of all time. And I agree with that 100%. I mean, this is a 10 out of 10, hands down, one of the best metal songs I ever heard in my life. And I've been kicking myself in the ass over the past few weeks for, waiting this long to discover this track, because it's just flawless. It's just a metal masterpiece. Everything about it, from start to finish, is just insane. And it's extremely progressive. It goes through so many changes, no pun intended. And the lyrics are fantastic. And there's just so many iconic moments in the song that are just unmatched and, unheard of at this point. So I guess we'll just start off talking about, we'll go through the track, talk about some notable things that happen. And the first notable thing comes right off the bat with the twin guitar intro, that ominous kind of like fade in guitar intro that gives the song this like weird foreboding kind of feel. And then all of a sudden, one of the grooviest, most chugging riffs comes in. I mean, fuck, this riff is just one of the best. It would make Tony Iommi proud, and it definitely has like the Tony Iommi Sabbath kind of feel to it. But it's really dynamic. I mean, it goes through all these like stop and start changes, and there's some great drum fills interwoven within. So yeah, really dynamic riff. And then Rob Halford comes in, and holy fuck, guys, this has got to be probably one of the greatest vocal performances I've ever heard in any song. No exaggeration. I mean, Rob Halford's, first of all, his phrasing on the song, just the way he sings, is so unique. I mean, you never hear anything like that. Like, he just switches from, like, his regular upper register voice into the stratosphere at the drop of a hat. And it's just fucking ridiculous. I mean, just the way it comes in with the, "Whiskey woman, don't you know that you are driving me insane?" Now, I'm definitely not going to try to hit that note, but when he sings the word insane, it must have caught everyone off guard back then. I mean, that must have melted so many faces. Just the incredible high pitch of that voice, and just how the riff kind of just stops, and then, stops when Rob Halford's voice gets high and then starts again. It just really gives the song this really cool chug-along kind of head-banging feel to it. And, again, I mentioned the riff's extremely dynamic. The verses are amazing at the start of the song. Some really disturbing lyrics, delving into, like, alcoholism and, the protagonist of the song being this, this alcoholic kind of like middle-aged woman, kind of her relationship's failing because of her alcoholism, and, she's getting old and she's trying to cope with that. And, it's a fucking interesting song lyrically, like really weird that Priest would come up with this. And it was actually a combination of two songs that Priest were doing before recording the album. A song called "Whiskey Woman," which was written by Al Atkins, who's the previous lead singer, and also a song Rob Halford brought in, called "Red Light Woman." And they basically just kind of fused these two songs together and developed it. And and out came this track. So just when you think the song can't get any better, the riff just totally breaks down into this incredibly head-banging part. You know the part I'm talking about, the do-doom, 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 do-doom. And you could really hear, like, the industrial influence on the band. Again, I mentioned, like, the scene of Birmingham had such a profound influence on these guys, and you could tell with those heavy chugging riffs, it sounds like straight out of one of those factories. And then, again, with the aggression, all of a sudden the song kind of just full out stops, and you have Rob Halford kind of like singing in this kind of like staccato manner where he's like, "You been fooling with some hot guy," and the riff kind of like, stops and starts again. Or not the riff, it's just basically like a guitar, like, I don't know how to describe it, but, like a down out. And, that's also extremely influential. Like, you'll hear that on a lot of, like, later metal songs in the 80s, like when the song just comes to a full stop. And Halford, again, sounds extremely aggressive on this part. Fuck, it's just, oh my god. I'm getting too excited talking about this. I'm going to get even more excited because the song gets better and better as it progresses. Next up, we have KK Downing coming in with one of the most intense guitar solos, I'm sure, at the time. Just definitely one of the most intense. Fantastic, flawless guitar solo. And I actually saw a video of them playing this, not recently, but, in the early 2010s. And he was getting so into the solo. I mean, he was playing it, like, with every fiber of his being. His face, he had guitar face to the power of 10. And he looked fucking possessed. So I definitely recommend watching that video. And it just goes to show how intense this solo was, especially for 1976. Just pure metal. And then the song winds down into one of my favorite sections. It gets into this, like, hypnotic kind of section, kind of referencing the past history of the protagonist of the song, talking about, like, how she used to be wonderful and beautiful. And the song really winds down into this really laid-back section. And Halford's vocals just perfectly change to fit that. Again, just showing his range. And there's some amazing wailing going on in the song. And again, some really cool, like, wah-wah pedal use, just giving it that laid-back, like, kind of hypnotic feel. And then all of a sudden, before you know it, the song fucking goes nuts. Rob Halford just screams, victim of changes. Like, Ian Gillan had some pretty high banshee wails, but this is like on a whole other level. I mean, when he screams "Victim of Changes," that is it. You're done. It's if you don't consider it one of the greatest metal songs ever, just hand in your metal license because it's expired. And the song doesn't even stop there. I mean, there's more to it. It goes into another solo with Glenn Tipton playing this time, and it's a little bluesier, a little more hard rocking, but still fantastic. And then to top it all off, the grand finale of the song has one of Rob Halford's just most guttural and most aggressive growls. That's right, I'm saying a growl in 1976. It sounds like, I always joke that he must have been taking a shit when they were recording it, because he sounds like he's really straining himself to the absolute limit. But oh my god, it gives the song so much energy. And then it has a few more high-pitched wails before the end of the song. Before the song ends with another one of his, just insanely high-pitched screams. And honestly, it just leaves you breathless. I mean, when the song's over, you're on cloud nine if you're a metal fan. It's just one of the greatest metal songs. And I already mentioned it's going to be a 10 out of 10, timeless. And, during that same live performance I was telling you guys about in like 2011 or 2012, I forget, Rob Halford was hitting those screams, sound even more aggressive, even more guttural. Probably because like he lost a little bit of that high-pitched falsetto kind of tone, but it still sounded amazing, and it sounded even more demonic than on the album version. So it's just amazing how they're still going to this day, just going so strong. Again, I know KK Downing's not in the band, and Glenn Tipton has his fucking Parkinson's problems, but, up until now, they were just on the top of their game. So yeah, Victim of Changes. I spent the most time talking about this because it's my favorite song on the album, but the rest of side one is incredible as well. So without further ado, let's get into the Ripper.
I smile when I'm sneaking through shadows by the wall. I laugh when I'm creeping, but you won't hear me at all. Oh, hear my warning, never turn your back on the Ripper.
Now it's time for the fucking Ripper. This song here is just 2.5 minutes of straight up metal perfection. I mean, I go on and on about how I like the progressive elements of the album, like the longer extended tracks, but this song is no worse than any of those tracks. In fact, it's one of my personal favorite songs on the album. Definitely in the top 3 best songs on this album for me, and it's just another timeless classic. I mean, I love the atmosphere behind this song. How it's told from the perspective of Jack the Ripper. It really paints that, that dark, dirty, kind of like late 1800s Victorian atmosphere. People Jack the Ripper creeping late at night trying to find his next victim. And it's just an incredibly creepy song. And the music just perfectly accentuates it. I mean, the staccato riffs of the song just really give you this sense of anxiety and this sense of foreboding that, someone's sneaking up behind you. And the lyrics are just fantastic. I mean, stuff like beneath the gas lamp, where the air is cold and damp. It's just a perfect, visualization of late 1800s Victorian England, which was, a really sexually suppressed and, insane society, to be honest. And again, the song is just incredible. The riffs, the staccato riffs are fantastic. Rob Halford does a fantastic job of embodying Jack the Ripper with this incredibly dark and disturbing kind of take on the song with his vocals. And man, my favorite part of the entire song is this freaking guitar solo. It just comes in out of nowhere, and it's just so tasty. It sounds so well produced as well. I mean, it has this like thick sound behind it, and the band comes in with this, I don't know if it's just Rob Halford's voice kind of duplicated, but with this kind of like, with these vocals in the background, they give it this weird kind of, like there's some screaming happening in the distance, someone being attacked in the distance. And honestly, like, what else is there to say about it? Oh, and then it gets into this even creepier riff, like late into the song, where the anxiety is like at an all-time high. I mean, at this point, you feel like you're about to get torn apart by the Ripper. And then Rob Halford comes in with the original theme and that chugging riff that just it's just incredible. It's easily a 9 out of 10. I'm even thinking about giving it a 9.5 out of 10. But for now, we'll keep it at a 9. And It's just a great change from the first track, which is really long, really over the top. This one's more like creepy, shows like their darker side. And yeah, just the first time I heard this, I wasn't expecting it to become one of my favorites because it's so short and sweet. And the first time I heard it, I was thinking like, okay, it's just a short rockin' tune. But no, guys, like listen to it multiple times and you'll realize this song has so many layers. I mean, there's so many amazing transitions, so much just jam-packed into this 2.5-minute track that it's almost unbelievable. It's just so well done. And it stood the test of time, just like Victim of Changes. I mean, it's one of their most performed songs, and yeah, it's just classic. And I was reading online about how when Rob Halford left the band, they kind of they took a new singer from he was pretty much unknown at the time. His name was Tim Owens, and he auditioned with this song. And he did such a fantastic job. He's been referred to as Tim the Ripper Owens ever since. So I found that pretty cool. But yeah, it's just incredible. Easily a 9, maybe even a 9.5 out of 10, as I already mentioned. And yeah, just such a well done track. I mean, so many people complain about the production on the album. Apparently, it wasn't too well produced. But I think this song's an amazing contradiction to that. I mean, if you listen to that guitar solo I was talking about, I mean, there's just so much meat to it. It's just so in your face. And the vocals are just, amazing. In your face, and the backup vocals. I mean, I think the production's amazing. Anyway, I digress, and now we move on to arguably the best song on the album, but currently my number 2 favorite song on the album, Dreamer Deceiver. Okay, guys, so I'm going to be combining track 3 and track 4 because, I really consider them the same song. And, even with the titles, I mean, you have Dreamer Deceiver, which is like the 6-minute kind of like the ballad of the album, or one of like the more atmospheric, laid back tracks. And then you got Deceiver, which is track 4, which is kind of like, an extension of that, like a build up, a fast paced rocker. Which kind of leads directly in from Dreamer Deceiver. So I really think it's the same song. I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think most fans also consider it kind of like the same song. They performed it together live on the Grey Whistle Test, so I'm going to consider it one song. And what a fucking song it is, guys. I mean, this track here is just one of like the epics of the album. Well, definitely the epic of the album. I mean, it's just from start to finish, it's just incredible. And I mean, this song, what I love about it, it really takes its time to build up. I mean, the first 6 minutes of the song is just this incredible, acoustic, laid back, hypnotic kind of song. And, Rob Halford, he really shows like literally the full extent of his vocal range. I mean, his voice ranges from like humorously deep, like extremely deep, as I was mentioning before, to like literally the highest pitched sounds of hell. And all within the same track. And, again, I just love the lyrics of the song as well. It starts off where he's singing kind of like in this falsetto kind of tone, but, kind of like laid back, if that makes any sense. And the acoustic guitar comes in and he's just singing beautifully. And it just sounds so mystical. He's saying this, he's talking about like this figure appearing to him. And one of my favorite lines in the entire song, the figure asked them if he was heavy. He said he did not know. Took us by the hand and off we go. I mean, that's just incredible and kind of ironic considering how Priest was considered one of the heaviest bands of the time, probably the heaviest band of the time. And in the song they say they don't know if they're heavy. So that's just a really mysterious kind of foreshadowing of their later career. Maybe they were pretty self-aware of how heavy they were. But yeah, I just love that line. And then when the drums kick in, again, it just breaks into that mystical, hypnotic feel. And the way the song just progresses and just builds and builds is just, it's the stuff of genius. And before you know it, you have Rob Halford singing like at the top of his lungs. Some of the most falsetto singing, some of the craziest falsetto singing I've ever heard. And the song goes into this solo, this amazing solo, which is really like the centerpiece of the song. And the solo takes its time. It really has so much feel to it. And kind of reminds me of a lot of like the Iron Maiden solos on their debut album, like a lot of the slower ones. So they definitely like took a lot of influence from that. And yeah, I just love how they took their time to really like progress this solo and really allow it to develop. So you know what, the song Dreamer Deceiver, it's just honestly, as I mentioned before, it's just incredible. And you know, the ending of this song, or I guess if you're considering the whole thing one track, kind of like, you know, the first 2/3 of the song, it ends with some fantastic screaming by Rob Halford, and just some piano kicking in, believe it or not, some straight up piano, which I just found amazing. And it ends with this shrill scream, you know, classic Halford. And before you know it, the heavy chugging riffs of Deceiver come in. And this is really the buildup of the song. Like, this is what it was all leading up to. And it doesn't disappoint. It's just a rocker that's just firing at all cylinders. And Rob Halford's just singing falsetto the entire time. There's some literally like blood-curdling screams. Like, he even gargles at the end of one scream. I can't even imitate it, but there's just so much personality to this part of the song. And, you know, it all just ends abruptly and finishes with like the intro acoustic riff that started the whole song. So yeah, just a fantastic way to end it. Just a great 2-minute rocker, and yeah, it's pretty much the epic of the album, along with Victim of Changes. And you know, I go back and forth like which one I like better, this or Victim of Changes. Right now, I'm more of a Victim of Changes fan, but that doesn't prevent me from giving this song a straight up 10 out of 10 because it's definitely perfection. Rob Halford's, you know, craziest vocal performance that I've heard so far. You know, in terms of like, you know, going from the lowest range to his lowest tone to his highest tone. And yeah, it's just an incredible song. And ending off side 1, which is just perfection in every way. Now we get into side 2, which it does have a lot of highlights, but definitely for me, not as strong as side 1. You know, all the weaker songs are on this side of the album. Not to say there's any bad songs. There's no bad songs on the album. But I think the Ripper, Victim of Changes, and then this one, Dreamer Deceiver, top anything on side 2 of the album. So let's dive in. You know, we'll talk about what I love, what I don't love, and yeah. All right, so opening up side 2, we got the short 2-minute kind of funeral march, piano-driven dirge Prelude. And I think the reason it's called Prelude is because apparently there are editions of this album that have side 1 and side 2 reversed. So this was kind of like opening up the album. But for some reason on the main edition of the album, like the one that's on Spotify and everything, this is on side 2, starting off side 2. So I guess, I don't know, it's still kind of a prelude, you know, starting off a new side of the album. And yeah, what's there to say about it? It's a really cool, like, nice break in the album. A nice piano-driven ballad. And it has this really strong kind of like, you know, sense of dread going throughout the entire song with like a lot of kind of like a funeral march kind of thing. So really cool track, really great way to start off side 2. And it leads directly into the next song, which is Tyrant. So yeah, really nice, you know, not really guitar heavy, very heavy on the piano. And just an interesting break from all the craziness that happened on side 1. So I give it the thumbs up. I'm going to give it an 8 out of 10. Alright, now we get into track number, I think I'm losing count, but track 2 on side 2 of the album, Tyrant. This one here, yeah, it's hands down my favorite song on side 2 of the album. I mean, I freaking love this song. It's great. It's not as good as any of the tracks on side 1, as I already mentioned, but it's just an awesome track. I mean, just a great, straight-up metal track. And this one here, I feel like it's all about the solos. I mean, there's nothing really epic about the song. Like, there's no crazy time changes or, you know, it doesn't really go into, like, laid-back sections or have an epic feel. But it's just a straight-up showcase of, like, what Judas Priest were capable of on the guitar. And the guitar solos on this song are just, you know, they definitely took inspiration from Ritchie Blackmore, you know, with the intricate playing and a lot of, like, the faster-paced kind of, I don't know how to describe it, but, like, a lot of, like, the, I guess you could say the faster pace, but a lot of the more like complex and like rhythmically challenging sections of the solos were definitely kind of taken from Ritchie Blackmore. I see a lot of Highway Star influence, a lot of Child in Time, which is fantastic. But they really take that to the next level and incorporate it onto this, like, balls to the wall metal sound. And it's just it's a great crushing riff. The only thing that bothered me about this song was the chorus. There's actually two choruses on the song. There's one that's extremely catchy, the one that goes, then our souls blessed in fear, chained and shackled. It's embarrassing. I don't actually know like the exact lyrics, but that one there, I freaking love that. That's fantastic. It shows their pop sensibilities. They can really come up with some really meaty hooks. Whereas earlier on the album, it was all about like the crazy progressive sections. But the chorus that I had a problem with was the kind of call and response chorus where you would have the band singing Tyrant and then Rob Halford singing after that. And I just found it kind of repetitive and, kind of boring at first. And I really think like the backing vocals could have had some more oomph to it, but now that doesn't bother me at all. I think it's fantastic, and it gives the song like this unique character. And speaking of the unique character, Rob Halford's vocal delivery on the verses is just really eccentric, really weird. It almost sounds like he's rapping at some points, like the speed of the delivery of his vocals. So that's really cool. And yeah, that's pretty much all I have to say about it. It's a fantastic song. Really catchy hooks, really catchy choruses, and some fantastic showcase guitar playing. I mean, there's two amazing solos on this song. And of course, it ends off with a fantastic Rob Halford scream. So, what's not to love? I'm going to give it a very, very strong 8.5 out of 10. And this song seems to be growing on me. So, again, I mentioned I've only been listening to this album for about 2-3 weeks now. So who knows? Maybe in the future it'll, rank among one of my favorites. But for now, I'm just keeping it at an 8.5 out of 10. Really good song.
Face to face. Helpless situation to win the perfect race.
All right, so now I think we're at track number 7, Genocide. You gotta love these fucking song titles. I mean, some of the coolest song titles. They're simple, but awesome. I mean, Tyrant, Genocide, Victim of Changes, Dreamer, Deceiver. I mean, these guys had cool song titles up the ass. And Genocide, to be honest, guys, I do really like this song. I do really enjoy it. But I don't think it's anywhere near as good as any of the other tracks on the album. This and the next song, Epitaph, which I actually like a lot. But I really think this is kind of a song of the times. It's just a pretty standard hard rock tune. Kind of similar to AC/DC for the most part. I'll talk about this later, but like later on in the song, it does get into some pretty heavy metal. But for the most part, it's just, your standard hard rocking, like mid-70s tune. In my opinion, at least. So tell me how wrong I am in the comments below. But for that reason alone, it kind of sticks out as kind of a weaker track for me on the album. And coming in at like 6 minutes, it is kind of lengthy for the amount of shit it contains. I realize this is like an earlier song that they were like, they had well before they recorded Rockarola. They were playing it live. So I'll give them a pass. Like, it's an earlier track. And again, I'm just giving them a pass in the sense of Judas Priest. I mean, if this was any other band at the time, I would fucking love this track. But because of how amazing the album's been so far, it does kind of stick out as being a weaker song. But still pretty cool. Some pretty good Rob Halford vocals, more on the rockin' side. The riff's more of like just your standard hard rockin' riff. Again, sort of like AC/DC at the time. There's a few interesting things about this song. It gets into this like kind of slow midsection where Rob Halford's singing incredibly deep, and he says the line "sin after sin," blah blah blah. And I know that's the name of the next album, which I'm looking forward to listening to. But yeah, so I think they got the name for the next album off of the lyrics of this song, which is pretty cool. It's just a weird part of the song. This whole song just slows down, and you have Rob Halford like, sin after sin, blah, 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 blah. The changes are changes of love. I don't fucking know what they say, but something like that. But personally, my favorite part of the song comes right at the end. The song just really accelerates and picks up the pace. and Rob Halford singing at an incredibly fast rate. I mean, a million words per minute. It's really cool. It's really heavy. And it ends off with this incredible guitar solo that kind of just fades out. And it just leaves you wanting more. I mean, like, this part of the song was fantastic. Like, why couldn't they put more of that earlier on in the track? But I digress. Overall, I'm going to have to give it a really solid 8 out of 10 because I'm comparing it to, like, all other bands. Like, this is a solid 8 out of 10 track. But just compared to the other songs on the album, it does feel slightly weaker. So that's my opinion. I still really enjoy it. And, yeah.
So nearly now, like once he clung to dearly, now let's go.
Alright, guys, track number 8, Epitaph. I don't even know what to say about this fucking song, guys. I mean, when I first heard this album, this song took me so off guard that I literally thought that I was listening to it on Spotify. I literally thought that it glitched and played me a song from a different band, because it actually does that sometimes. But no, I double checked, and indeed, it was Judas Priest. And I couldn't believe my ears. I mean, this song was just, it's just so different than everything else on the album. It's like a piano ballad, but unlike Dreamer Deceiver, it doesn't have like that dark undertone. It doesn't have that mystical feel. It's just a straight up piano ballad. And, you know, this song here, it's just obviously influenced by Queen. I mean, hands down. If you don't think this song's influenced by Queen, like, just listen to a lot of like early 70s Queen. And, yeah, you can't argue with that. I mean, it's obviously a huge influence. And it's actually kind of comical how low-pitched Rob Halford's voice is. I mean, throughout the album, we've been subjected to some of the most incredible banshee wails I've ever heard in my life. And to have this song here, it's just a, you know, a sappy, sickly sweet kind of ballad with like the high-pitched falsetto backing vocals reminiscent of Queen. And it's just, it comes out of nowhere. It's just hilarious. And I like it. Like, fuck. I actually like it. I enjoy it. It's a nice change of pace. But I would totally understand how people like metalheads and, you know, fans of Judas Priest in general wouldn't like this song. And I totally sympathize with that. It just feels so out of place on the album. If you're a Genesis fan, it's kind of like the equivalent of More Fool Me on Selling England by the Pound. It just feels so out of place, and it kind of really disrupts the flow of the album. But fuck it, I like it. It's an enjoyable song, and it's really funny. I mean, it's funny how different it sounds from all the other Priest songs. And it's so funny, in fact, that one of my friends told me, like, Rocco, I listened to Sad Wings of Destiny, and I couldn't believe that was Rob Halford. I mean, it sounds nothing like the guy. And again, just another testament of his full vocal range, you know, what he can do on with the vocal chords, the good old vocal chords. And yeah, it's just a short 3-minute track. You know, I don't know. I feel like I'll give it like a 7.5 out of 10, or maybe even an 8 out of 10 at the most. But no more than that. It's probably the weakest song on the album. But, you know, a cool change of pace. And it leads directly into the next song, which is Island of Domination. I mean, there's no gap. It just directly leads into it. And that's a great way to close the album. So let's get into that. Oh, just something I forgot to mention. Just a funny little tidbit of information is that when I was reading the Wikipedia page for this album, okay, first of all, that's a sign of being a noob when you have to read Wikipedia to get a sense of what this album's all about. It mentioned that this song, Epitaph, was rated one of the greatest progressive rock songs of all time. And I just want to just correct that for all the people viewing this video. Like, there's no way they were referring to the Judas Priest song Epitaph in whatever list that was. They were definitely referring to King Crimson's Epitaph, which is definitely one of the greatest progressive rock songs of all time. But yeah, just a funny Wikipedia correction I thought I'd throw in there, because people might be listening to this and reading that and seeing that on Wikipedia and thinking like, what the fuck? This isn't even progressive rock. But anyway, just thought I'd throw that in. Anyway, onward to Island of Domination.
It's all becoming too much. I can't go for one man. Now we take her onto the island of domination.
All right, and finally closing out the album, we get Island of Domination. And this is just another song that I don't even know how to explain it. I mean, it's such a weird track. It's definitely like the weirdest song on the album. Just there's so many time changes. It's extremely progressive, and it just goes through a lot of different motions that, I think I'm too early in my listening experience to really like comment in depth on this song, but it's really interesting and I really enjoy it. I mean, what's there to say? I mean, the main riff of the song just comes chugging in, and you got Rob Halford giving some of the most dynamic performances of the album. Just some really cool vocals on the album. Some really soulful vocals from Halford. I mean, so far we've heard him like with his really deep voice and his really high pitched voice, but on this song we get a lot of like that punchy kind of attitude, with that personality, and a lot of like some real like soulful qualities and some funky qualities to his voice on this track, if that makes any sense. And yeah, it's just really interesting. There's a lot of Queen influence as well, with like the falsetto backing vocals, really reminiscent of stuff on Queen and Queen 2. But yeah, it's just a really interesting song. And in the middle of the song, it gets into this really sleazy kind of riff, the bam bam and you really hear nothing like that on the rest of the album. And I think they were kind of just throwing caution to the wind. Like, it's the last song on the album. Let's just make this crazy, over-the-top song with all these different sections and, weird, styles. And lyrically, it's pretty, now knowing that Rob Halford's homosexual, I have no problems with that, by the way. But, Island of Domination, that sounds kind of, and there's lyrics about, like, I can't handle one more man. It makes you think, like, maybe this song's about, like, maybe a sexual experience that Rob Halford had. But I don't know. That's just my theory. But again, the song is just really interesting, really funny. And again, it's just inexplicable. It's just a really weird song and a really great way to close off the album. And I really dig it. I'm going to give it an 8.5 out of 10. On side 2, I like Tyrant like slightly better than this song, but this song's been growing on me as well. So I could see that this song might be neck and neck with Tyrant, but again, those guitar solos on Tyrant just push it over the edge. So yeah, Island of Domination, fantastic way to close the album, and that brings us to the end. Honestly, guys, in conclusion, I freaking love this album. I mean, I'm pissed off that I've been missing out on it for so many years, and I can't wait to like delve into Judas Priest. I mean, I already heard Sin After Sin earlier today, like many times, and spoiler alert, it's fucking awesome, and I think it's just going to increase. I'm going to increase my enjoyment of that album over time. So look forward to a review of that coming up soon. And thanks again for watching, guys. As always, I really appreciate it, and thanks for giving me an outlet to like express my enthusiasm for this fantastic music. Anyway, peace out, guys, and see you next time.